I have a welcome here. I have some stuff that I have to say. So welcome to everybody who's attending. My name is Brad McDougall, and I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for ONCUE Regina. Thanks to a federal grant from the Canadian Performing Arts Workers Resiliency Fund, administered by Canadian Heritage, ONCUE's incubator program in 2022 to 2023 will include 3 professional development opportunities intended to serve a range of performing artists working in different disciplines at different stages in their careers, and both within the city of Regina and provincially. As part of the incubator program, this is the 6th, well, more likely the 9th in a series of online professional development workshops. ONCUE Performance Hub is a fairly new nonprofit performing arts organization with a new organizational model and approach, offering a collaborative producing model serving local artists and diverse audiences in Regina and beyond. Our aim is to enliven Regina's downtown core and activate connections between performing artists, businesses, and audiences. We bring together artists across dance, music, theater, and spoken word. Our goal is better retention of creatives within our community through a supportive environment that facilitates innovation and the realization of creative ideas, while providing practical professional development of the business and administrative skills creative entrepreneurs need to survive and thrive as independent artists. ONCUE Regina is grateful to be working on Treaty 4 land, the territory of the Nehiyawak, the Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. We also acknowledge the people of Treaties 2, 6, 8, and 10. We recognize the past and ongoing harms experienced by these peoples and embrace a mandate to work with them in fostering greater understanding and a better way forward. Along with us today are our interpreters, Barb Froese and Sue Schmidt. Landon Walliser, who is not here, is our administrator. Also with us today is Heather Irvin, producer at Globe Theatre, to talk to us about producing within your community. Heather is a culture communications and community development specialist with over 14 years of experience working in the not-for-profit and culture sector. She has worked for Arts Etobicoke, a community-based arts organization in the West End of Toronto. She enjoys researching and funding community-based arts projects. She is experienced in grant writing, stakeholder engagement, and creative outreach methodology. She has worked for Theatre Passmarais, Theatre Columbus, the Blythe Festival Theatre, the Toronto Fringe Festival, and Tarragon Theatre. Heather is currently the producer at Globe Theatre Regina. Now, just a few house guidelines. If you can and you feel you want to, you can put your questions in the chat or raise your hand in the reactions icon. And we will try to get to your questions as quickly as we possibly can. So for now, please mute yourselves and I will turn it over to Heather.
Thanks, Brad. Thank you for everyone for joining. As Brad said, I'm Heather. I use she, her pronouns, and I am very grateful to have grown up here in Saskatchewan on Treaty 4 territory. And then I left when I went to theatre school, where I studied at the U of T and Sheridan College, doing a joint program in theatre performance and theatre and drama studies. So I worked as an actor and director and independent producer in Toronto for many years before full-time immersing myself into the arts administration world. And Brad mentioned a few of the places that I worked, but I was very fortunate to work with lots of creative and intrepid entrepreneurs in theater making. That's also where I met Jennifer Bruin, who I have the privilege of working with as the artistic director at the Globe Theatre currently, and a longtime collaborator through arts communications and cultural placemaking. So thank you for joining us. I always like to start off with a few questions for the audience. It's always nice to know who we're talking to. I know that some of you have your cameras off, so if you want to pop them on, there's just a few of us, so it's nice that we can see each other and have that sort of a more informal dialogue. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because this is about producing with your community, so I want to be talking and communicating with all of you. So I have a couple of questions, and you can use the hands up icons, or you can just put your hands up. But I just wanted to get a sense of who's all in the room and the experience levels that we are working with. And thinking about, so that's the first question is, who has produced a theater production before? I mean, there we go. Great. Who has produced more than 3 productions? Yeah, more than 5? So we have a few very experienced producers in the room, so that's exciting. I wondered who currently is working out of Treaty 4. Perfect. Or who maybe grew up and worked here before. Perfect. And who has been involved in a theater production in another city? Obviously some of you, because you're not in Treaty 4. And in another province. And great, internationally? Wonderful. Perfect. And then wondering about the type of productions that people perform or produce. So thinking about original work, new work. Great. Classical. Perfect. A mix of both. Wonderful. And then I'm just going to ask a question so people can answer out loud, but about what is your most impactful theater experience, and want to sort of toss the ball out to the community to see your answers. And I'll share one after, but and maybe I'll pick on Brad if you have a thought. We'll try to keep everyone's answers to under a minute. So it can be just a couple of words. You don't have to give a ton of reference, but it's just nice to have those experiences from each other going into the presentation.
So for me, I produced one show, which was my own, self-produced, and I learned a heck of a lot through doing that. Some through mistakes and some through just hitting it right on when I needed to.
Amazing. Sorry, I muted myself. I'll pass the ball. Elizabeth?
Hello. I don't have much of a voice tonight, so I produced I fell into producing because of need through youth that needed help. So I ended up producing new work that they had done. And like Brad, I learned a lot through my mistakes, trial and error, but I found it quite fascinating. So I want to do more. Thank you.
Ken?
Me, I've produced a lot of theater, everything from independent work to producing musicals, fringes around the world. And I am also very recently took on executive leadership at On the Board staging company in Saskatoon, which is a artist support organization that works with artists producing work. So
Amazing. And do you have a most impactful theater experience, whether it be
the most impactful was
experiencing?
producing in Regina with Hectic Theater, which was my company there. We produced a show called This Is Cancer by Bruce Horak that we produced in Regina, and it was an incredibly powerful show that we brought in from Calgary at the time. My creative partner and I at the time went to go to Blitz Weekend, saw the show. We didn't know any better, so we just went up to the artists after and we're like, hey, we want to make this show happen in Regina. And they were like, we don't know any better, we'll go to Regina. And it was a show that throughout the rest of the time that Hectic Theater was around, we would get occasionally we just get another email show up about how much that show mattered and meant something to them when they had seen it. So yeah, it was as a producer, that was pretty awesome.
Amazing. Wonderful.
We didn't make money on it, but
But it's impactful. That was the question. Citric, is that how I say your name? I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm actually a magician and illusionist, and we create and produce all our own shows. It's definitely a different world. You're dealing with a lot of different things that in a normal theater you wouldn't. You've got the illusion element as well, and it kind of adds a little bit to, someone might forget their line or they might forget what they're going to do next, but then you have an illusion that's got to fit in as well. It's been an experience for sure.
And do you have like a most impactful experience from your time, either seeing shows or performing or producing your own?
There's been a lot of different experiences. It's a whole new world for me. We're trying to learn as much as we can as we go, and every day is a new exciting adventure. So
Perfect. Thank you. Louise, would you like to share? Oh, I can't hear you. Can't hear. You could share in the chat. I'm sorry. I have, I was gonna say one of the experiences that stands out as an impactful experience for me was working on a production called Yichud Seclusion in Toronto, which was a co-production between Theatre Passe Muraille and Convergence Theatre, which focused on an Orthodox Jewish wedding story. And we completely transformed our theatre into a temporary theatrical synagogue. And so much so that we had people coming to the theater on our off days asking when the synagogue moved into the area and when they could become members. So we had to explain it was temporary just for a show. But the entire process of that show was very culturally enriched and took steps to include all of us who were not from the Jewish community into the culture and tradition of the production and why it was so important to that community. We would share Shabbat dinners, and we had a lot of cultural training. All of the designers on the project and stage management and the entire team were from the Jewish community as well. So it was a really special opportunity for those creators and those artists. And the show segregated our audience at the start of the show as they came in, like you would at an Orthodox Jewish wedding. And then we had this massive curtain dividing the space, and at the right time in the show, which was the right time in the ceremony, the curtain came down and everyone danced together and were brought into this immersive world of theater. And the tickets were a hot commodity, and we definitely sold out the run. But prior to the show, what made it so impactful on the administrative side is prior to the show, the largest funder pulled out of the show. It was Harold Green Jewish Theater. And they had been approached by their funders saying that they were nervous about the show and that it was going to put Orthodox Judaism in a bad light, and that their funders were getting skittish. So they pulled out from our co-production last minute, and Convergence Theatre, the creators of the show, stepped up, and with them and our team, we ended up raising $60,000 in a week to get the remainder of the budget and get the show. It might have been 2 weeks, but to get the show up and running and on the board, so to speak. And then we ended up selling out the entire run. In fact, had a revival of it as well. We had people lined up around the corner. We always held rush tickets at Passe Muraille for all of our shows. We'd have people lining up at noon around the corner waiting to get tickets, even though we could only let it, but there might be no shows. People would wait until the evening performance from noon, just on the off chance they could get in. So that was a very impactful experience. It also taught us a lot about sort of guerrilla fundraising and marketing and immersive cultural experiences, which has sort of stayed with me throughout my career. And I'm very much a proponent and an activist for experiential theater marketing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But that's one of my fonder theater arts admin historic stories, where we didn't sleep very much and we all kind of rallied together, but we ended up with this beautiful piece of theater that was impactful for both the artists, the administration, and the audiences, which is kind of the holy trinity of theater making. So Louise, I'm just reading your note. So she said that my name is Rachel Corey, was her most impactful production. Audiences were so engaged. Wonderful. Thanks, Louise. Hi, Sue. Thanks for joining. We are just sharing stories of our most impactful theater experiences as a way to sort of get to know the group that's gathered here today. If you have something you'd like to share, please feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to jump in. So today I'm going to talk sort of my presentation around 3 points. The first is publicity and community engagement. So talking about media relations and telling your story, grassroots engagement, and involving your stakeholders. I'm going to touch a little bit on community investing and alternative funding, who is aligned with your values. And I'm going to talk about artist engagement and care. So investing in your community as also an important part of producing. So, wonderful. If at any point people have questions about something that I'm talking about, please, as Brad said, put the hand up emoji, put it in the chat. Brad, if someone puts something in the chat and I don't notice it, feel free to interrupt. I have sort of pauses in here for questions as well, but I'm always happy to engage with what's on the minds of the group that we're gathered with. So publicity and PR. So I also had my own theater publicity company in Toronto, where I worked with independent theater companies and particularly did a lot of training for independent and fringe companies. So people doing sort of 1 or 2 productions of their own a year, independent producers, helping them get the most value for their publicity and advertising dollars, but also how to tell this story. And I always like to start off by reminding everybody when we're talking about publicity and media that it's just storytelling. And you are all storytellers. That's why we're in the arts and we're telling theatrical stories. But thinking about your press release and your media pitches as a story as well. So what's the hook? How do you hook them at the beginning and how do you summarize it at the end? And thinking about oftentimes administration and producing tend to fall into sort of our own silos and separate our work from the art. We just have to get these contracts done. We just have to write this and get it out the door and get to the media, but really thinking about those as integrated departments, and that it doesn't work without one or the other, right? So I'm really thinking about how the art engages in your storytelling in the publicity aspect of it. So it sounds basic, but reading the script is really important when you're doing publicity. I've talked to lots of publicists who haven't read scripts for a show that they're doing. They just, read the little marketing blurb and type it up and send it off to media and, wonder why they're not getting any engagement. Whereas the marketing materials should be different from your publicity materials because it's for a different audience. It's for what you're putting on social media might not be the same information that you're putting in your press release to the Leader Post or the Star Phoenix or your local global news, and thinking about that. So making notes of the themes, your standout moments, the unique attributes of this show. I had a mentor when I first started doing theater communications who told me I needed a door that I could shut because sometimes you have to talk about the art in a way that the artistic director won't like. So you have to find that hook that's going to get the media's interest, and thinking about that, the general populace, the people who are watching global news at 7 a.m. or CBC, and those are definitely different audiences, CBC radio and a morning show. So when you're pitching to those media outlets, thinking about their audience and the story that you want to tell them, and what's the story that's going to get that audience to your show to buy a ticket. Thinking about, especially for those of you doing new work, if you have an opportunity to sit down with the playwright and the director separately and asking them questions, getting that, talk about their approaches, treatments for the production, Designers are also fascinating resources for you, for media, for publicity, and how they approach the show, the themes in their work. We just at the Globe just closed Sir John A. Acts of a Gentrified Ojibwe Rebellion. And one of the most fascinating pieces of the design for people was how we made a highway treatment on the stage. And it was an alley stage, so audiences were on both sides. And it looks exactly like like the Trans-Canada it's supposed to look like, and there's potholes and things. And people were fascinated about the process of that, which would have been, in hindsight, a fantastic angle for some media for people, and talking about the construction of that. And potholes in Regina are such a sensitive subject for people. So how do you play on that to then tell the story of your show is thinking about what people in your community are connecting to. It's, we have summer and we have construction, or winter and we have construction season. Those are the two seasons people joke about here. And so how do we talk about that a little bit with the treatment and getting the designers involved in media interviews as well, not just the actors or the director. All of the people working on your show are a resource for telling your story. Things like other hometown heroes, local celebrities. Is there someone involved in your company that is doing theater for the first time, that's been with your company for the first time? Is there a big name from somewhere else in Canada that's coming in? So thinking about those angles to promote the show with your local media. And then also thinking about what angle can you promote the show to the national media? We have great CBC broadcasting here in Canada and available to us across the country. There's shows that do things across the country, and they're going to need a local angle that has national impact. So what is it about your story that is going to be of interest to audiences across the country? Or is it? And sometimes it might not be. Sometimes regional and local is your best angle for that, for publicity. And sometimes it's a mixture of both, but really thinking about when you are tailoring your pitches to those outlets, thinking about their audience and what is their approach, listening to past episodes too, like when I was super young publicist, I said something to somebody who was on a media list, and they came back and said, we only do French stories about XYZ. And I was like, oh yeah, that was wrong. I should not have sent them that pitch. And it was very nice of them to let me know that I was doing it wrong. But thinking about not doing things by rote in that way, which it can be easy to do when we're so busy, but taking the time to sort of curate those pitches and write them out for the different media providers. Press releases. I have a link I can share with Brad and the OnCue people. That's just like a big beginners or intro guide for marketing and publicity and for writing your materials, which I can share. I don't need to go into full details on all of that today, but I do have some thoughts to share, but I'll send that link so you'll have access to that afterwards. But using quotes from those interviews that you did before with the playwright, with the director, thinking about interesting ways or news ways to talk about the show, and then share that press release with multiple people in your company. I also often will get, my husband is not involved in theater at all. And sometimes when I'm doing things for the public, like a press release or something that I want media to pick up on, or that would be going to the general public, I'll get him to read it and ask him what he thought or what he thinks it's about, which is a good litmus test. Or friends, I play a lot of adult sports, so I'll get sports friends to read something and ask them what they think this is about. So getting to that outside eye and people who represent your public versus people who are so entrenched in the theory and the intricate, detailed elements of your production that it's hard to separate sometimes those thoughts with what's going to the public, which is often a different language, so to speak. So using your community as your support on that, getting feedback. I like to send out press releases 6 weeks before production, and then 4 weeks before we open, I send out detailed individual pitches. And then 2 weeks before the production, I follow up with those reporters again. morning shows and television loves snippets and scenes that can be performed on site. So identifying where this is possible and including that in the pitch. You know, we have a tight 2 minutes with a two-hander that can come and be done in studio, or like those sorts of what's possible. You know, we have musicals, we have a song which features a soloist that can come fairly easily into studio with minimal costumes and props. That's an easy cut to for them on any of their segments. You know, radio obviously doesn't need visuals, but if you can help paint that story for the producers, I always think that the CBC radio producers are the hardest working journalists in Canada, and they create really kind of amazing content. So if you can give them a step up on choosing your story to cover by doing some of that initial work for them, tying it in to what's happening. I just saw a question, Ken, and I'll get to that in one sec. That tying it into stories that you've heard them do in the past or angles that they're looking at, knowing what that producer likes to, what stories they like to tell. You know, we had number 34 at the Globe this fall, and we had a really great piece with 2 different CBC radio reporters that did 2 completely different stories on our show. One was from a really football perspective, and it was all about like the experience of football, and our main actor who played George Reed is from Toronto, had never been to a CFL game before, didn't know George Reed, but is this brilliant, nuanced, wonderful actor who really took the character on and took Regina on in his heart. And so he did an interview about going to his first CFL game. That's part of what was for us, which was important, was getting that entire cast and company of designers to a Rider game as soon as they got into town. So 20 of us went and experienced Rider Nation and sat in with the fans and that community, and they met George Reed at a separate occasion. So they did this really beautiful interview about discovering football and what it means to bleed green, quote unquote, and talking about that experience of taking on a legend as a performer in this very specific and unique prairie community. And then the director and playwright did an interview with a different radio producer about the challenges of writing a living legend and somebody who's so entrenched in our community. So there were very separate pieces that were both aired in the same week by the same station, but because we approached them with different hooks and different stories, we were able to get both those stories on. So thinking about that. Oh, the times that I mentioned, yes, Louise, it's also in that document I'm going to send out. So it's all in there, but it's 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks is what 6 weeks getting the press release out, 4 weeks doing individual pitches, and 2 weeks following up. If you're looking at national coverage, though, you need to extend that by at least 2 weeks on every one of those weeks. You know, Q, for instance, they do a lot of amazing arts coverage, but they plan their segments 2 months out. So that same with Unreserved is usually planning a month out as well. Ken, sell you time on their interview thoughts. Yeah, we have had a lot of pickup on interviews for theater here, which was, I found in Toronto, basically the only more like TV spots I was getting were the 6 a.m., the 7 a.m. morning shows, which also can pose challenges when you're on a tight budget on an equity contract. Obviously, that costs money to get actors there, but it doesn't to get your directors and your artistic directors and your producers. So that was often a way to do that. But here in Regina, I have found that there's been a shocking amount of TV pickup over the last season. And I think we've had a lot of on-site opportunities and not a lot of in-studio because they still have very strict COVID policies. So if you want to have, we could do one artist. So our artistic director has gone to Global a few times. We just had an artist for Sir John A. Acts of a Gentrified Ojibwe Rebellion do an interview for Global Morning in studio, but it's only one person. So if you want to do a spot that has sort of that the dynamic of multiple artists together, then you have to sort of propose something offsite when we launched our season last year, I got CTV to come do a special by the George Reed statue. And that was like funny to them. They thought it was neat to be at Mosaic Stadium. I was gonna say Ryder Stadium, Mosaic Stadium, to do a theater pitch. And that was the hook that got us in the door there, is that we had our artistic director hanging out with the George Reed statue. And we had a pretty significant 4-minute spot on that on our season. And then that was the hook that got us in. And then we got to talk about everything. And then with Sir John, they were actually also going to send and do a spot, like an in rehearsal. And we were talking about the mechanics of how to build a car in theater, and that doesn't block all the angles and the sight lines. And so we had a beautiful mechanic that designer Caitlin Hickey had designed, and they were going to come and do like an in rehearsal, like learning to go on a road trip kind of spot that they were very interested in. And then there was unfortunately some illness and we had to cancel, but we still got a spot by going in person with one artist who did a great job, but was very nervous to not be with his entire company. So that was a long answer to a short question, but yes.
Well, so my question was actually more around like
ad sales.
I'm also, yeah, like I'm having like CTV getting in touch with me, and if we want to be on their morning show, they want us to buy the time, and like wanting us to invest like $900 to. So I'm just wondering if like you're not facing this down there, or
I
what?
am not
Okay.
yet.
Like, and so what they're offering, they were offering like a 3-minute interview and a Monday morning live segment, but it was going to cost us $900. So I straight up said, I'm not paying for that. That in my mind, they should be.
Yeah.
Public
Well, if it's a news
interest.
program, absolutely.
Yeah.
I did
Okay.
come across that in radio in Toronto. Often they wouldn't do coverage, like a live interview of a radio, like on air with one of their personalities, unless you were also buying advertising from their broadcasters. Now, Zoomer Media was sort of the like conglomerate there, and if you got an interview on Classical 96, generally your show sold out. That was the theater audience in Toronto, so that was something that when I was doing marketing that I would often insist on, if I was buying ad spaces anywhere, that they also had to give us interview time, but I never bought ad space to get an interview, if that makes sense. That wasn't something that I had come up as like a stumbling block wall, but that's interesting to note here that they're starting to try to pitch that, and also I think goes against journalistic ethics.
It feels not integral, not a lot of integrity on that. I mean,
No,
the radio stations will sell you ad space and time, but they always give you a pretty good, they say it's worth $21,000, but you pay $600 for that. So.
Yeah.
And then they're a sponsor of your show, is their requirement.
Yeah, and they go on as a media sponsor and do a pretty good job of plugging that in addition. But yeah, definitely those news outlets should not be charging for interviews. That's a good thing. Thank you for bringing that up. It's good to be aware of. Great. I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about community engagement as a tool. But did anybody have any questions specifically about media pitching and sort of that publicity angle of it before we move on? Great. Moving on. So community engagement, thinking about how engagement transforms into marketing, into ticket sales, and building your brand and your network of supporters. Talking a little bit about cross-sectoral partnerships, and nonprofit and health centers as community mobilizers. One of the people that is a great inspiration to me, and I highly recommend anybody who is in a producing or communications or marketing role, go out and buy this book, or I think OnCue already bought it and you can borrow it from them for free. But it's called An Invitation to the Party, Building Bridges in Arts Marketing by Donna Walker-Kuhn, which is spelled Kuhne, and she is out of New York. And I had the great privilege through a very lucky grant to get to work with her in a small group setting where she would fly in from New York and do workshops for a few afternoons. But she particularly focuses on racialized communities, culturally specific communities, and using community leaders to mobilize your audiences. And a lot of the philosophies and practices that I've adopted in my work have been inspired by her work. Particularly two models I want to talk about as a community cultural leaders model and an ambassadors model. So at Arts Etobicoke in Toronto, I used a model called community cultural leaders, where we identified, after we did all that research of reading our scripts and talking with the production and finding out who our audiences are and how, like, what would be the barriers to getting those audiences to our show, identifying leaders within that community. So we had in Etobicoke, it's one of the largest immigration hubs in Canada, and has a lot of non-Western art form practitioners. Also is geographically massive. It could take you over an hour just to get to the subway station, and then an additional hour to get downtown to consume professional art. So one of our goals was to create opportunities in our community to keep people from having to do a 2-hour commute one way to see a play or some dance or paint a painting or see an art exhibition. So we were often doing performances, productions, activities in non-traditional spaces and using cultural placemaking models. So parks, doing outdoor artwork, especially through the pandemic, thinking about places that people felt safe going to, and then how we could animate that space with the art that we were offering. And so identifying cultural leaders within the community. And then, which often happens, we ask a lot of our community, we ask resources, we ask time, but we made it an effort to pay those cultural leaders, to pay them modest fees and for what time they had and what budget we had, but the payment was to acknowledge their expertise in their community and to then activate them to be our ambassador to that community, to bring us back questions like, oh, we did this survey, or we did this phone tree or whatever it was, and we found that everyone really wanted a movie in the park, and then no one came to that movie in the park. So why what was the barrier there? And getting that information from those ambassadors. Or conversely, so we did this event and everybody said they want South Asian dance in the park next year. So we're going to do this series of classes in the park, and we need to fill that registration. So activating these ambassadors, these leaders, to fill those spots. A perfect example of that is we had some of these dance classes that we were offering, and the registration was quite low from members who normally would come to the programming, and it was because there were cultural barriers to dancing in public in mixed company. So how do we create safe spaces for those participants, which we were able to get that feedback from the ambassador, and so offering programming at the same time with different groups, and still in the space, but being able to respect those cultural barriers, and then selling out all of the classes and having to add extra classes and more permitting for the park, but really using those ambassadors to help promote our work, but also to bring back concerns, whereas somebody might not, especially a new audience member, might not feel safe or comfortable telling you why they don't want to go to the Artesian, or why they don't feel comfortable stepping through the doors at the Globe Theatre, or where they would like to be consuming art instead. And so getting that personal connection to the community through these cultural leaders has been key for myself and my arts programming and marketing so far, and using their expertise and celebrating them for the expertise that they hold that I don't, and the place in their community that they hold that I don't, and that we can get to over a time when you work in depth with the community. But using these cultural leaders gives you a step up on the trust that you have to develop with new audiences. And that trust is inherent with the people that they are already engaging with, and they are lending you their trust as you build up that community and that new audience. Donna Walker-Kuhn also, she has a model called Ambassadors, and she often talks about church wives as ambassadors and as mobilizers. So people who are already in their life able to mobilize a large group of people. So if you think about a church bake sale or a volunteer drive or a ball drive or whatever it is as an example, and that person is already experienced at getting 50 people to show up on a Saturday to do something. So then how can you use those skills to get those 50 people to come to your show? And that person, that mobilizer, a community mobilizer, to become your theaters or your production company's ambassador. So how do you activate those local community members to be your ambassador? So it can be as simple as, you know, a folder with your company's name on it and like little inexpensive business cards that say Brad McDougall, Globe Theatre Ambassador, or as an example, just because I work there, using my own example. But and then how do we support Brad in selling tickets and getting groups? And that's really, it's just group sales models, but in a different way, and using community leadership and expertise as a way to bring in new audiences and groups of audiences and people who already are used to getting together and doing something in this group. So how do you bring them in to your audience? And often we talk about sort of the tastemaker in the group. And so it's identifying who is the tastemaker in these groups. So going back to that research you did when you were looking at the script and thinking about the themes and who would be interested in seeing the show, why should people see the show, and thinking about that list. And then how do you get a tastemaker or a leader in that community? How do you get access to that person and then bring them on side to your cause, to your show, to your production, and empowering them to be your ambassador? Yes. Alternative spaces for theater production is often another way of creating theater engagement. Trading and bartering as a independent company is often a very good tool for creating theater and maximizing your resources. One of the examples I'm going to use is a theater company called Fixed Point, who is based out of Ontario. They are a fabulous resource, and they have a lot of really cool projects on their website. But they had a production that some of you might have seen because it did come through Saskatchewan called The Tale of a Town. And it started The Tale of a Town Queen West as the production that I was involved with them, but have been longtime collaborators over the years with Lisa Marie and Charles. So their production took abandoned storefronts, and they took residency of that abandoned storefront for a 1 month period. And during the first, sometimes longer, depending on the production, sometimes when they did their cross-country tour, shorter, but they would take this abandoned space and partner with the landlord. And the landlord's not going to rent that space mid-month. It'll be taken over the next month. So once that month rolls over, give the space to us. You come on as a sponsor, and your name goes out there. It's activated. People will see us in the space, which also is promoting your space. You can leave your for rent sign up, whatever it is. So they used these spaces, and then they interviewed the community. Queen West is a very storied and historic part of Toronto. And so they were gathering stories of Queen West, interviewing residents, interviewing Jacob's Hardware store, where everybody who's ever built a set in theater for many years has bought screws, nuts, bolts, etc. from Jacob's, and they would sell them to you in bulk, or just two if you just needed two. So everyone has a story about that. Everyone has a story about the streetcar on Queen West, which is the longest streetcar line in the world. Everybody has these stories. So getting those stories from the community. And then those community members are now invested in that production because their story and their community is going to be on show, on display in the production. Getting Jacob's Hardware on as a sponsor, and they donated all of the set materials that they needed, but then they were mentioned in the show and promoted in the program, and sort of that invaluable word of mouth promotion for the store. And they were excellent community engagers, and they took this show, they did the show, it was a huge success. They did it again, went back to the landlord and said, what else you got? What's your next space? And we got a bigger space, a 2-story space, and did it again, and worked on the show in that way. And then they catapulted that version of the production and into this amazing cross-country tour as part of Canada 150. And they went east to west coast and into the Northern Territories, doing A Tale of a Town Whitehorse, A Tale of a Town Halifax, Tale of a Town Regina. I think they were in Regina. They were somewhere in Saskatchewan. And they did all of these incredible community engaged activations, which turned into a hugely commercial success for them, but also an artistic success. But it started off by bartering with a landlord downtown Toronto to give them a space for a month. And that's how it was the start of their show, and alternative venues, and creating shows that match your venues. Twisted Shakespeare is also a really great example of that. They started off as a fringe show in Toronto. They have bring your own venue as an option. I think the Fringe here might do that as well. But they created Shakespeare shows that would fit into this long, narrow bar that was just off the Fringe strip. And it quickly became the hottest ticket in Fringe. And the shows were all adapted to be in this space. And it started off as just a Fringe company that they formed a company just so that they could submit to the Fringe. And they became a successful independent theater company based on that and on using these alternative venues and alternative models of theater creation. Yeah, one of the other examples I wanted to share about sort of community engagement and using what people are interested in to bring them into your production, into your theater. I worked at Passe Muraille for many, many years, and one of the promotions that we ran was called Word on the Street, word of mouth subscriptions. And we went to Word on the Street, which is a literary festival. And we went to the literary festival and we had a pop-up tent. And our first year we made I printed off signs in our laser printer in the office and just taped them to our little tent. And we brought our chairs from the office. It was very sort of a last minute stick tape and sticky tack to make our booth stand. But the festival was important for us to be at because it's a group, we identified it as a group of people who would have interest in new plays. Passe Muraille does new play development. It's one of the oldest theater companies in Canada, particularly focused on new Canadian plays. And we want it to be where people who are engaged in words were. So people who were interested in the literary arts, which is very similar to new play development and a very similar cross-section that we weren't necessarily tapping into. We also knew that when people who go to this festival, often everything there is at a discounted price. So what could we do that would bring us audiences that wasn't going to bankrupt us, but that would also appeal to these audience members? So we offered something called a word of mouth, word on the street subscription. And it was $100 and you got in to see all 8 of our shows. So it was a very discounted ticket subscription, but you could only come in the first week. So you could only come to our preview performances and up till opening weekend. And your tickets were not transferable to any other week, but you could come in that week. And the idea is then they became our word of mouth ambassadors. So they were people who were invested in so we didn't make a lot of money off of those ticket sales, but those ticket sales that first week was always sold out. Our audiences our performers had full houses for previews, which in Toronto is a miracle in and of itself. We had full houses for previews, and we were able to then capitalize on their investment in us and leverage their interest into more ticket sales. And if their friends came, their friends got a discount on their ticket. So if a word of mouth subscriber sent you, so we could also track to see how that would grow and grow and grow. And it was hugely successful for us. And we sold hundreds of those subscriptions. We went back the next year with more staff, not just me, the artistic director and general manager. We went with a whole plethora of box office people, and we sold out again of our subscriptions. And our audience from that group, people came back to the festival because we didn't sell it at our theater. It's not something you could sit on and think about and buy the next week. It was a one-day only subscription that was available at this festival where these interested parties would be. And it was a huge marketing tool for us that, again, capitalized on people who have an investment in your type of creation and then use them as ambassadors to us. So it was a really successful, and I think they might still do it, but it's been a while. I'll have to call their producer and find out, and I can follow up on that. But it was for many, many years, it was a large part of our marketing budget was to go to this event and to use those festival goers as our ambassadors to our word of mouth subscribers. So moving on, I see there's a note in the box, so just give me 1 second. Community leaders, yeah, Louise, it's amazing how when somebody feels invested and empowered by you, the way that they will work for your art success. If they feel connected to the creation, and if they feel connected to why and to purpose and your mission, they will work very hard. Boards could be capitalized in this way, but often board members are very busy and have a very specific, I do the finance, I do the this, I do the that. So thinking about, sometimes past board members can be very good ambassadors and ticket sales. You can issue them challenges. Just to go back to I'm very passionate about ambassadors for theater, but to go back to that and thinking about issuing them challenges, or the first 2 people to sell 200 tickets, the artistic director is going to take them out for dinner and they're going to have a private conversation about next season, and what are rewards that you can do that don't cost your company a lot of money, because obviously if we had the money, we would just be hiring a bunch of group sales people and sending them out there in the world. But how do we reward their investment in meaningful ways? Dress rehearsals are very good for that. Dinner with the designers, or like cocktails pre-show with like a designer chat, things that are easy enough for you to do. Preview nights, directors have nothing to do with that half hour before the show, because they can't be backstage with the actors. So what can you use that director for? Can they sit down and have cocktails with your donors? Can they sit down and have a conversation in the space? We did something called Egg Rolls with Andy, who was our artistic director for a while, where every Tuesday preview, he would interview the director of the show, and the sales for that night started doubling. Everybody wanted to come to that and get a sneak peek of what they were going to see on the stage and the treatment and the process. So thinking about resources that you already have in-house that you can start capitalizing on for those engagement and enrichment experiences. Again, thinking about community activists and ambassadors, but thinking about cross-sectoral partnerships. Community health centers are the best community organizers that I've had the pleasure of working with. They're also incredibly overworked. So whenever you're going to them, making those opportunities easy for them. Social agencies, unions are fabulous organizers, and they love when there's opportunities for their members. If a union organizer can send something out to their members that's like even just as simple as a discount, like everybody in local 276 gets 15% off tickets because we believe in unions. We also in the theater rely on union workforces, so it's nice to have that sort of partnership. Thinking about, again, in number 34, the playwright's father was a steel worker and a welder. And there's a little shout out in the play. One of the characters talks about his hardworking father, who was this union worker. And I called the local in Regina, and they lost their mind. They were so excited about being talked about in theater, and what a cool opportunity. And they sent out like an e-blast to their hundreds and hundreds of members across the province, and shared that knowledge with them about the show and promoted the work that we were doing. And that was just a little thing that I thought of last minute on preview night, sitting in the audience, and I was like, oh, that's a beautiful moment about unions. And I was like, oh, I should call the unions. And so had I thought about that months before, I could have been creating a night for them all to come, and it could have been one night of the show could have been sponsored by local X, and they bring all their members and they sell it a show for you, right? And they bring their families, and then you throw them some tickets for their Christmas party that they can raffle off for your next show. And again, it's an investment back in them, and then they invest in you as well. So we talked about picking out themes and content that can be celebrated by others. and talking to those partners, those cross-sectoral partners, those unions, anybody that you are partnering with, about what their audience is, what their staff, what their community engages with, and how do they like to be communicated. You know, maybe they don't like emails, maybe they like Facebook, maybe they don't do any social media. So how do you reach them then? What is the best way to reach them? Is it calling the social committee and then that social committee gets it out there in the world? What is the best way to reach out to those members, and then making it easy for your partners to do that? So if they said, oh, our members love email blasts, creating a little JPEG that has like, we invite local 276, or we're huge fans of CUPE, come be huge fans of the show, or whatever that is, giving them that content so they can just send it out there to their groups.
Heather, I think Elizabeth might have had a question. I don't know. She looked like she
Oh,
had her
sorry,
hand
Elizabeth.
up there.
Oh, sorry, Heather. How, like, I'm not much for discounts myself. I just think the art organizations don't make enough money, like, to get through. You're mentioning discounts, so do you feel that's really important?
Not always. It depends on your audience. It depends on who you're reaching out to. You know, the steel workers, we gave them a code just so we could track it. That's often why I like discounts, is so you can see what's working. And if something didn't work for you at all, but it cost you hours and hours and hours of time, and then it sold you 2 tickets, then having those codes helps me track it. I don't like doing tons of discounted tickets either. You don't want to devalue the art or the work. But I do think you also have to think about who the audience is. And if your show's not, if you're not selling, what's a way that you can fill those seats? Because I think the best sales tool is a sold out house. So how do you get those houses sold out? Which is why we did that preview week at Passmarais. It was to sell out that first week at that very discounted rate, but we didn't have any deals for the rest of the run. I mean, we have our rush tickets and student tickets, but the rest of the tickets were all face value tickets, using those early adopters and rewarding early adopters for that. So having a different price point for those tickets, also trying to push those community groups to those early performances as well. So if you are giving them a discount, it's only for that preview week or for that first week of the run, and that's not
like
eligible.
that, yeah.
It's not eligible beyond that. Yeah.
And you mentioned 15%. Is that kind of like standard discount, or?
I think it all depends on your company and your, I always try to do like around 10 to 15, because I just like to say it's like you're saving the taxes. It's like all in pricing or whatever it is. And so I think it was 13 in Ontario. So I would always say like 15 was my kind of go-to. And that also thinking about that discount on your ticket as a marketing expense. So building that into your marketing budget too, as I would often do that, and thinking about it as that way. So it's not a loss of revenue, it's a marketing spend. I had an example about this, like, how does your community like to be communicated with? I was doing this really amazing intergenerational visual art project where it was through also Canada 150 money. We were celebrating communities working with a lot of newcomer communities. And they had this garden that they were so proud of, and they wanted art in the garden, and they also had no bench. And a lot of the participants were very old, older women who needed places to sit out of the sun. So we were commissioned an artist to build this bench, and then a muralist who took their words and their stories and created this beautiful word-based mural on their gardening shed. So it was creating public art and public art experiences built with the community, but also practical for their daily lives. And we couldn't get anyone to sign up to these classes with the artists, and they were free and they had been asked for. And so we were very surprised, and we're trying to figure out what it was. And we went and we talked to the health agency, the community health center, and we talked to them about it and sort of got their sense of why, this was brought to us, the funding came to us, we brought it, this was what was asked for. And it was our posters were too nice, and they were designed by a graphic designer, by an artist. And they thought that they weren't welcome because they weren't professionals. They weren't professional artists. They weren't fancy enough to come. And so to make that more accessible, how do we, especially when there's language barriers to our audiences. So we went with clip art and a 1-sentence poster design. So it's like, help us design your bench, with a clip art of a bench and an email and a phone number. And the next day it filled up all of the workshops. And so thinking about how we communicate with each community that we're communicating with, again, which is a similar piece of information I shared with when we were talking about media, is that each media outlet also has different priorities and they tell different stories. So tailoring your content to those communities is really important. Yeah. I also like to say that community is built in small steps that have large ripples. It's a long-term investment in your work, this idea of community engagement and building those audiences year after year, and those engagement opportunities and enrichment opportunities. Developing a list of groups and community organizations that might be interested in your themes and in the work that you do, and meeting with them throughout the year, not just when you're selling them something and when you're trying to get them to buy a ticket. Thinking about, I used to do coffee meetings with these community interest groups and the social chairs and community health workers. And, I'd have like a $500 budget that was just for taking people out for coffee and not asking them to do anything for us, but keeping them invested with your organization over the year. And then when you do, the next time you talk to them, when you ask them for something, you don't feel like you're only ever asking them for things. You're also giving them your time. You're hearing what's of interest to them and working on that. To your, Elizabeth, your point about discounts, I'm a firm believer in group discounts. So if somebody is buying 10 tickets or more at a time, I always want to have a discount for that. Again, it's that mobilization of groups. And if you can have 5 people bring 10 to 20 people and sell out a night of your show, then absolutely they can have 10% off. And that's generally standard. It's 10% for 10 people. And then over 20, then maybe it goes up to 15%. But and they all have to be purchased as one block of tickets. But yes, it takes time. It takes months. There's no easy fix to building your community and engaging and investing in your community. It is a lot of work, and you're not going to do it all at once. So thinking about when you make that big list, what are your small targets for this next show or for your next production, for the next 3 months? What are those targets? Who are your priorities for meeting with? Who do you think is like the low-hanging fruit, and who's going to take 6 months to engage with and to find the right way to connect with? Also, letting them know about your company's goals and your long-term vision is really important. We often think about parachuting in and out of communities, and as funding comes and goes, and which isn't helpful to building sustainable audiences and long-term engagement in the arts, and thinking about how you can engage with them in a long-term way where your values and goals align. Hopefully you're not only ever producing one show, but that you'll have multiple engagement opportunities for your company and for this community. And it is a long, it's a long process. I don't want to say you can snap your fingers and get 60 unions to your next show, or social agencies or community groups or whatever it is, but keeping yourself in their periphery, in their mind, so when they do have an opportunity for spending or they do have an opportunity for engagement, they think of you first. And that's sort of this reciprocal relationship where it's giving and taking as well. So another example of a resource for you to take a look at is the Wallace Studies in Building Arts Audiences. It's a foundation out of the States that has an incredible amount of money invested in audience resources, and not just theater, but all sorts of different arts organizations. They funded this one organization to shut down for a year as they were revisioning, so that they could come back with a thoroughly thought out and detailed audience engagement and enrichment plan, and follow the studies of that and to see what worked and where they needed to pivot. It's really fantastic resource. I highly recommend reading it and taking a look where they're speaking. The Wallace Foundation often will pop in at like arts ticketing and arts marketing conferences and do a presentation. They're a fantastic resource and really well researched and thought out and presented in their approaches to audiences. One of the examples from there that I like to think about is ideas for family days. So they were working with a museum, and that was open on like family day holidays, that was having no audience pickup on those days, which seems kind of like a no-brainer or an easy opportunity on family day. Same thing, we would program a kids show to coincide with that family week or spring break. But then if you weren't getting pickup, what do you do to make it a more engaged experience for the families and for the youth? So they started doing activating their lobby for every family show, not just like thematic crafts, but also like games, art kits that they could take home after the show that had links to what they saw in the museum, or we did at the theater, where we'd have hire a visual artist to hang out with the kids in the lobby, and parents could like, you know, have some wine or a ginger ale or whatever it was that they wanted to engage with while the kids were active, because there's that like 30-40 minutes when you get to a theater that then it just becomes rambunctious and sometimes is overwhelming for parents, for guardians. So how to engage them fully and then give them something that they take home so they think about you after they leave the theater as well. And looking for, I always like to think about when you're looking for your new audiences and developing your new audiences, thinking about how to find your new audience and finding the resistance before it happens. So resistance within your own organization, resistance within your current audience members, and resistance from this targeted audience member that you want to engage with. And this is a concept that I have taken from the Wallace studies as well, is where is the resistance? And they have this great little worksheet that you could work through. So for instance, at a theater company that I was at, Burlington Performing Arts Center, is a very wealthy community in Burlington. And we didn't have a lot of dual income, no kids, that demographic. We didn't have a lot of them coming like that under 50, but with 2 incomes and disposable income, who do have an appetite for entertainment. So we didn't have a lot of them, that sort of audience category coming to our theater. So how do we engage them? So we thought about, why will they visit? They have expendable income, they have the time, they're not traveling outside the city necessarily because they like the community that they've settled in. So they have like-minded viewpoints. They like coming to the bar and having that social interaction before and after a show, and also cultural currency and thinking about the coolness factor of being an arts member or a theater member and belonging to this culturally specific group. So thinking about why they were going to visit, then thinking about how their participation can support our mission. So for us, they would be activating our building as a cultural hub. They would be helping to increase civic pride. They would definitely help us generate income and increase our membership. So as a revenue driver, and then increasing our awareness into new communities, because they start talking to their friends and their friends start talking to their friends. And then also it would engage a new generation of audience members for us. So then the next question was, how might they interact differently with our organization or with our theater, with our production? And what changes would we need to make to welcome this new audience into our space? So what we thought was, we would need longer bar hours. We need more food options and hot food options from local restaurants. Maybe there's opportunities to order things in advance. We'd have to have increased Wi-Fi. Our Wi-Fi sucked in our lobby. So how could we get public Wi-Fi for our community? Our bar had very limited hours, and there was some pushback from some staff and from some audience members about not wanting it to be a bar crowd. And so how do we identify that resistance in advance and work to avoid that clash? So we also thought we'd need more seating in our lobby. We had this massive, beautiful space with floor to ceiling 2-story floor to ceiling windows, which is like beautiful and lit, and like 3 chairs. So how do we make it a more comfortable place that people would want to actually come and hang out, spend time at our lobby? Maybe we bring back more live music. And then we have to ask ourselves, where might we see resistance? So our volunteers was an area that we had noticed. We had an army of incredibly passionate, dedicated volunteers who were very rigid in, well, this is the way it's always been done. We also had a lot of older senior members who didn't like change, who wanted it to be a bit more exclusive, an exclusive club of theater goers. So then how do we mitigate those resistances? So looking at possible issues in advance and doing hospitality training with staff and volunteers, talking about the reason why we're making those changes, explaining everything in advance, having those open conversations and transparencies, talking about how the new audience is going to actually help the theater make our strategic goals. It's going to help us have longevity and a long-term connection with our community. We'll be able to continue to be that gem of downtown. And thinking about the perception of, oh, if we have the bar and we have live music, then are we just a club, which was an actual, feedback that we had from people about that. And so how do we have that conversation about being a more accessible space to a different generation or a different group of audience members, while still maintaining this place of pride and not alienating our current audience members. So there was a really great sort of workshop and conversation we had about identifying these members. One of the changes we made was having our memberships, where people could have a lounge membership, where we had sort of sectioned off part of our lobby. We had a sponsor. We went to one of our car dealerships and was like, do you want to be the VIP lounge sponsor? Which we didn't have a VIP lounge. We just made one with a little rope and some signage from them. And then when you became a member, you got 2 free drinks, alcoholic or non, to every show that you bought tickets for. We had a drink sponsor, so it cost us nothing. We just took that wine out of our sponsorship from our drink sponsor, and then ate the cost of the non-alcoholics, which was fine for us. And then that became this sort of place that people like to come pre-show. And we were working on partnerships around food and what does that look like and the logistics of that. And we had a little catering kitchen, but our shows are often at the same time as restaurants are the busiest. So figuring out those logistics in the back end, but we went from, a handful of people hanging out pre-show to hundreds of people hanging out pre-show and then spending money at our bar, which was also a revenue driver for us. So thinking about the resistance before it happens and how do you avoid that resistance? What are the steps you can take from your internal organization to avoid resistance to those new audiences? If you're planning a season, like multiple shows, I also like to think about a series of audience enrichment activities. So things like talkbacks. I talked about the egg rolls with the pre-show, those sorts of things. But thinking about, even for just a run of a show, what are some theme or publicity nights that you can plan? We had an Irish playwright at Tarragon, and we reached out to an Irish whiskey company to see if they wanted to sponsor an audience night. And they did. So we brought them in to do an Irish whiskey tasting in the lobby pre-show. So the show's at 8 o'clock, you come at 7:15, and Tullamore Dew was in our lobby doing free whiskey tastings, and they brought little appetizers to eat with the whiskey, and that was free for anybody who bought a ticket on that night. So we planned it on our lowest ticket sales nights to have that engagement and an enrichment opportunity for your audience, something that would be fun for single ticket buyers. So our subscribers could care less about tasting whiskey in the audience. Our subscribers were people who were really invested in the art. They were very invested in the creation and the promotion of Canadian theater. However, single ticket buyer who was like, I don't know what I want to do on a Friday night. It's like, oh, free whiskey and a show, or it could be a date night, those sorts of things. So it was a really helpful tool, those experiences for single ticket buyers versus subscribers and people who are invested long-term in the organization. And then you have an opportunity to turn those single ticket buyers into long-term investors in your theater company. I partnered with a flower and a chocolate company for both Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, being able to add, and we added $5 onto a ticket on Mother's Day. And if you came on Mother's Day and you paid an extra $5, there's flowers on your seats, which was pretty amazing. And those days sold out instantly. Same with the Valentine's Day, the chocolate company gave us chocolates at cost, and the flower company was part of our hospitality sponsorship. And so we just got, it was like a little mini bouquet of like 3 roses and a box of 2 chocolates on their seat when they arrived, which was a surprise for people and a huge revenue generator for us. We added $10 onto those tickets and sold out of all of our chocolate and flowers, and had to add another performance the next day that with the same promo, which was really great. We had Quebec Tourism. We had a French playwright involved in one of our shows, and Quebec Tourism sponsored the opening night party with all Quebecois cheese. We had like a cheese buffet, which was a huge incentive for people to come, and you have this like huge meal, and we had French wine and French cheese, and it was pretty exciting. But we brought in that night, we used that tool to bring in extra media coverage, and we had media in the lobby and recording that event, which then we could use as a promo to sell more tickets about this amazing experience and show. So just thinking about those small experiences that wouldn't cost you a lot, or you could add an increment onto the ticket to enrich that experience for your single ticket buyers. And I always like to say, what would make attending theater more fun? And there's a lot of studies that show that even if your audience does not like your production, they will return if their experience was fun, if it was welcoming, and if it was warm. So how can you, I know, in spaces, lobbies are at a premium and we don't always have the best lobby space, or if we're in alternative spaces, how do we make that coming to the theater, hanging out before the show, the intermission and the after the show, what are the small things that we can do that make that part of the theater experience enriching and engaging, that will continue to help your audiences come back more and more? That was sort of it for me on community engagement. And then I was going to move on to alternative funding, community investing, unless people had thoughts on community engagement, marketing, publicity, etc., or questions. A theme drink. Hold on, I have to open this. Connecting the show, it's so fun. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Mocktails also, making sure that you have, if you're doing a cocktail or a drink, having non-alcoholic options as well is really important. And if you're ever offering wine or champagne, making sure you also have non-alcoholic options as well. Inclusivity. And you can charge more. Like if you're charging $7 for a gin and soda, you can call it the like, whatever, something that's linked to, I'm trying to blank with something that's linked to your show and charge $10 for it with a fun name and an umbrella in it. And people will pay that for the experience as well. So then it also bumps up your revenue on that. So talking for alternative funding and community investing, I don't want to talk about grants. There's like OnCue has so many resources about grants and grant writing. So does a lot of other organizations. If you do have specific questions about grant writing, I'm a grant writing nerd, so I would happily talk to you about that at another time. Feel free to send me an email. I'm sure Brad will share my contact, but I'm Heather E at globetheaterlive.com. So I want to talk a little bit about private donors, sponsors, and support, and community-centric fundraising, which is a movement over the last few years and particularly gained a lot of traction during the pandemic and the social reckoning that we've all been living through and celebrating since around 2020 and beyond. Community-centric fundraising is a movement to evolve how fundraising is done in the nonprofit sector. Its goal is to support fundraisers and other nonprofit professionals to re-examine every fundraising philosophy and practice they've been taught, engage in vigorous, ongoing conversations, and explore fundraising in ways that reduce harm and further social justice. Their values are equity, courage, community, integrity, and movement building, and really thinking about the movement of community-centric fundraising, thinking about each other as partners, not adversaries or competitors, but more arts funding is better for everybody. And the more that we have people that are invested in and interested in donating and supporting and sponsoring the arts, the better it is for all arts organizations. So thinking about that and thinking about each other as partners, and thinking about our funders as our partners and not someone that we're beholden to, but that they're a partner in our creation and in what our offering to the community. So they have a website that's can go through all of that much more detailed than I can. So I highly recommend everyone checking it out. It's communitycentricfundraising.org. And it's a wonderful group of very smart, much more intelligent people than I, who have been dissecting fundraising and philanthropy and coming up with new and exciting approaches to reduce harm and further engagement in social purpose. But I want to talk a little bit about opportunities for fundraising and sponsorship around your independent theater productions, thinking about local businesses and owners and places that you frequent, places that you spend money. So as a larger institution, it's a little bit easier in some of those ways. But, you know, if we have a Moneris machine that does all of our credit card processing, we pay fees every time someone uses a card. So Moneris should be one of our sponsors. We should be going to them. If we have a concession and we sell only Coke products, Coke should be sponsoring us, or we should be selling other people's products. So, and the people to go to there aren't necessarily the people that are their community purpose or social engagement managers, they're fund managers, but it's the sales managers. It's the people that you're buying stuff from. They do have some leverage for sponsorship and for opportunities to invest in your company. So thinking about where your company spends money. At Burlington, again, we had this big facility. We had incredibly high landscaping fees because we had a lot of snow and we had a lot of grass and all those sorts of things and flowers, and it was part of our agreement with the city that we also had to have a beautiful exterior and all this sort of stuff. So we're spending a lot of money with landscapers and outdoor lawn care, and nobody had thought to ever ask that company to sponsor a show, and it was probably the quickest sponsorship call of my life. And I said, do you want to sponsor a show? Here are some options. And they wrote me a $5,000 check like on the phone and said, come pick it up tomorrow. We don't care, just put our name on whatever show. And that was a really interesting lesson for me in that asking where you're spending your money and people who are engaged with you. They had a contract. We're spending $20,000 with them multiple times a year. $5,000 means nothing to them to keep that business, right? And there are lots of landscaping businesses that we could be giving our money to. So thinking about where you spend your money. Companies that invest in your show also become invested in the outcomes because they want their investment to do well. So I had a Sun Life advisor who wanted to bring some clients to a show, and she wanted to have her name on that show. And so we did a package for a few different shows where she gave us $8,000 and she had tickets to a couple different shows. But the night that she was bringing everybody there, she was promoting that show hard. She was selling tickets that were outside of her block of tickets because it was important to her that when her clients came to the show, it was a sold out show, that they saw her as a tastemaker, as somebody who chose this great event to bring them to, this successful event that they were all now a part of. So she became a big investor in the outcome of our show as well. Same with wealth management. There's a lot of independent wealth management providers. I don't even know what their official term is, financial advisors. And I worked with this one gentleman through RBC Wealth Investment who managed about a dozen people's funds. And I was going to him not to get him to donate from those funds to us, but rather to bring those people to a show. So just coming after him to buy 20 tickets or whatever it was for a show to get those people in the door to something that they liked, that's something that they could invest in, that they could see the purpose of in our community. And then I could go to them in future to ask them investments from those funds, from their foundations into our organization. But starting that conversation first with a simpler ask and something that gives them value back immediately, that they can see the value of when they bring their clients to our show. A lot of corporations like banks are also looking for volunteer opportunities, and they have a little bit of money that they can provide to go with their staff. So RBC, most branches have discretionary funding. So the branch, if it's under, in Toronto, if it's under $10,000 Ontario, it's not a special request fund, but I've found, I think it's Saskatchewan, it's under $5,000 is not a special request. So anything under 5,000 is generally an easier ask when you're going for corporate sponsorships, because it doesn't need to go to different departments. It can be at that location of whatever branch, bank, or credit union, or whatever, those sorts of things. It's an easier ask when it's in that amount. And those oftentimes, like RBC, they would give us $2,000 for any event as long as they could send 20 volunteers, because they wanted something that their staff could engage with. They have this time built into their corporate policies where they need to be giving back to the community. So we would use them as ushers, or for our galas, we would use them as physical labor for setup, tear down, those sorts of things, put them in the schedule. And then we'd also get a financial boost from that as well. And they really liked it. And then they also told all their friends. Rotary clubs often do that as well. They like to have their members be involved beyond a simple cash exchange. So how can you engage those members in your production in a way that's meaningful to them, but then also isn't a lot of extra work for you. So thinking about things that you already need done, like having them come and paint a set that you're just going to have to fix, is probably not useful. But what is the way that you can leverage their time to also have access to the resources financially that they can offer with that. Again, thinking about every company that you pay bills to or buy a product from, is there a way that they can sponsor you? And in kind is huge. Also, if you're going to spend that money anyways, if you don't have to spend that money, you can spend it on other things. If you have a bar, it's a huge source of sponsorship opportunities. We said pops, snacks. If you're being brand loyal, they should be sponsoring you. Credit card companies, I mentioned already, looking at your operating budget line by line, and making sure that you put an ask into every company that's on there. Everybody that you're spending money with, you should be putting an ask to in some way. Our carpet cleaners sponsored a show. Our ice cream company gave us free products when we were paying a whole bunch of money for those specialty bars before that. And then we started getting them for free so that we could leverage that for our members. Sales departments, and tell them how the sponsorship will increase their sales as well, right? And their numbers, their bottom line numbers, people. So and no soft asks, like we're there to help them sell more product. A lot of this is all done over the phone, like these days, like really quickly, like sales calls. They don't have a lot of time. So being able to get like right to the point of what you're asking for is really important. Sell them why within 30 seconds, and then you can work out the details, but they need to know the why and why it's beneficial for them. We talked a little bit about like samples, like the Irish whiskey. Another example of that was hugely successful in Ottawa, which I wasn't a part of, but it was very cool. Mercedes did test drives of their cars. That was part of their sponsorship bonus. They did like a $50,000 like season sponsorship type thing. And then at opening nights, they'd have their sales team on site with this supposed, elite spenders who were spending money at the National Arts Center and other places, and then Mercedes would take those patrons for drives, and it was a sales tool for them, a promo tool for them, and ultimately to Mercedes, $50,000 wasn't a ton of money, but to us in the theater world, obviously it's a large sponsorship. So for them to have that, we had at Burlington, Mercedes did $50,000 and sponsored our season, and they had a car in the lobby the entire season. And a car parked out front on our like terrace area, and they could swap it out throughout the year. And just thinking about like your media assets too, if you're placing ads, it fattens up benefits for sponsors as well. So, you know, it's if you're placing ads constantly in, you know, I did the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail, then we could say the show was sponsored by XXX, and then that means that their name is, that sponsor is now in the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail or the Leader Post or wherever you're doing your advertising. They get that promotion as well as the promotion to your audiences. Verbal sponsorship notices at shows, people love hearing their names, and that's an undersold asset as well. So, you know, thank you for sponsoring Sir John A. Acts of Gentrified Ojibwe Rebellion. We tell that to 200 people every night over the course of the run. Thousands of people that are hearing about this company, this local company, and also hearing about this company in connection to something that they believe in because they've bought your tickets. So you're selling your audience engagement and the investment of your audience in your art. You're selling your sponsors access to that. So thinking about that. I had this great, I was at a great presentation by the Consulate General to New York, and she spoke about being bold in your arts asks and making sure that everyone knows the dollar amount that you're asking for. And she said that Americans are a lot better at it than Canadians are, and she gets hit up a lot more in the States than she does when she's here in Canada. But nobody wants to sit at a 2-hour lunch meeting without an ask, especially if you have to wait till the end of the 2 hours to find out why you're there. She told this great story about, I think it was Guelph or one of the universities invited her to this long lunch, and she was a very public and alumni that people knew, and she would sit down for this long lunch, and they were talking about all these amazing things that they were doing and how the program changes and the community engagement and the investment. And finally, at the end, she said, "Are you going to ask me for money?" And they were like, "Oh, I mean, yeah, we are looking for investment from alumni." And she said, "You can just ask me for money. I wish I'd known at the beginning so I could ask more questions about what the money's for, what are you spending it on, what are my options? But if you wait till the end to put that ask in, it doesn't give them an opportunity to sort of to respond or engage with you in that way. You have to be brave and you have to be bold because it is hard to ask for money, and it definitely is not part of our Canadian persona necessarily. But if you don't ask, you won't get, right? So thinking about that and listening to the people who give out the money, sponsorship and donation requests to the big banks and organizations often lack creativity. When they are deciding between organizations, they're hoping for a creative lean from an arts org. We can't give them the big impact on social or et cetera that they get for themselves or with other like for-profit commercial companies. So we give them the benefit of the access to our community, which is what I was talking about a bit before. But they also don't necessarily like you to come in with like a big shiny package right away. They want to be listened to, and they want to tell you what they're interested in and what they're investing in, and then you can come back to them with that pitch, with that customized opportunity for them based on that conversation. So you can say that you're asking for money. What you're looking for is investment in your show. You're looking for financial resources, but you want to hear from them. What does your company like to invest in? What's important about the community to you? Where do you see a benefit from us partnering together on this project? And then listen to them. Let them talk about their social purpose. Let them talk about why they want to be engaging with our audiences or why they don't want to. And then you can counter that with a proposal or create a proposal that's specific to them and to their company's needs, and makes them feel seen and heard. Does anybody have questions on any of those sort of sponsorship donor conversations that I was sort of talking at you? I guess we weren't having, I was just talking. But if you have any questions on that, otherwise I was going to move into a little bit of artist engagement and care. Brad.
Yeah, you know, a lot of the examples of stuff you have given have been really sort of at the big level. People who have seasons, people who have theaters themselves that can, you know, host and sponsor these things. I think that I know, like, I'm assuming, Louise, you're the same as me, that a lot of times it's really just You know, you got a play that you've either written or you want to produce. You get one venue. You don't get that many performances to actually, you know, create some of these sponsors, you know, things. So it's a little bit different when you're actually just doing these little one-off things. Do you have sort of suggestions? I mean, all the stuff that you've given me has been great food for thought, and I think that, you know, we need to think much more clearly about what the product is that we're offering and how we can relate that to the community. But I just kind of wondered, you know, it's a little bit different problem, different beast.
Yeah, I think that's what I was talking about when I first started talking about with those smaller asks and the places that you spend money also personally, thinking about that. If there's somewhere that you spend money on a regular basis, like I went to the same restaurant every week near my place in Toronto, and they were a place that I would go to when I was doing my own productions or producing to see if they would invest. Somebody where it benefits them to give you a couple $100, a couple $1,000 because you invest more into their business regularly. Again, thinking about places where you have to spend money on set, on costumes, on props, whatever those sorts of things that you're doing, and asking those places that you're spending money. One of the productions through OnCue and Riser, they're talking about specifically doing a cocktail or a mocktail at a restaurant that's in line with their company or with their production, but they're asking that company not to give them cash, but to put something on their menu which is something I've done for other productions. We found an ice cream shop in Toronto and we said, for the month of June, every time you sell Tutti Frutti, which was linked to what we were doing, could we have $1 or $2 from that sale? We did the same with a pizza company. They put a pizza, their special of the month was like the Arts Etobicoke pizza, which was just like a pepperoni or whatever, or Canadian pizza that they had. And we got a portion of every one of those that they sold. And then we also promoted that company, that restaurant, to all of our audience members as well, telling our community to go there because they support the arts and they're supporting me as well. And so it was mutually beneficial promotion, and then they would pay us out at the end of the month. I just small examples there, and leveraging your personal community, which also feels hard sometimes to ask, but the personal community of places where you're spending money is where I like to go first. And thinking about that, are you going to a coffee shop every week? And what does that add up to? And thinking about approaching those companies to support you as well, just as you support them. There's small examples for smaller scale. We also often, when I was self-producing, when we were doing asks for money, telling them where the money goes. Like specifically, I did a cross-country, I self-funded and produced a cross-country Shakespeare tour where we did like a 4-province tour, starting in Ontario and did Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC, and got it fully paid for through individual donors. And part of our campaign was telling people how much it costs to pay an actor, how much it costs to put an actor in a hotel for a night, letting them know the hidden expenses, tanks of gas. We did a show here in Regina at Wascana at the Gazebo, and we had that in the centerfold of our program, was explaining what those costs were. After the show, people were handing me, I was the producer, were handing me cash, being like, oh my gosh, we didn't realize how expensive it was to get people places or whatever it was. And he's like, here's a hotel in Alberta, here's a hotel in BC, or whatever that was. It was a hugely successful campaign for us, thinking about those hidden expenses, and people like to help where they can and giving access points that aren't in the thousands, but we got every city that we performed in, we had at least 10, if not 15 people donating at the $50 to $100 mark. And those are people that we're probably never going to engage with again, because it was a touring show when we were based in Toronto. And who knows, like, we weren't sophisticated enough to be capturing all that audience data at the time cross country. But we made it impactful for them. We gave them an opportunity on the day how they could engage and support with us further. And in advance too, when we were doing our sort of fundraising event in Toronto and things like that, we also had those options on there and created those opportunities. The other thing to think about is space is very expensive. So if somebody can't give you money, maybe they could give you a space that you could do a fundraising event at, because the biggest thing about galas, which I'm like on the fence about in general, because I find that they cost more than often they bring in, but is space and food. So if you have a food sponsor or a space sponsor and you can host something and you charge your community $10-15 to come, and you have some entertainment because we're all creators, or whatever it is that you have, or food that's on offer, those are really great low risk investments from your sponsors. They can give you space on a night that it's not being used. Coffee shops that close at 4 or 5, that space is still there at night. Is there something that you could do in their space at night? Can they give you their space for rehearsals? Even sometimes we would rehearse in strange restaurants in the evenings, or for your events, taking away the opportunity for you, taking away the need for you to spend money with something that they can offer you instead of cash. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I
Sorry,
think Elizabeth has a question.
Yeah, you touched on fundraisers. So what do you see? Can you talk a little more about what fundraisers are efficient or beneficial
Oh yeah.
to get a show off the ground?
Yeah, I think it's all about your capacity and organizational capacity, really, as to what fundraisers. I ran a pretty successful one for years. That was we used a cooking school, where the cooking school donated the space and their staff. And then I went, invited chefs from different restaurants. We hosted it on a night that the restaurants would be closed. And it was places that I ate mostly. And I went and talked to the owners or the chef and said, hey, would you come and do a tasting plate of your signature dish for 100 people? We have all the staff to serve it and the space, but you would have to donate the ingredients and your time on the night. We'll put your name on everything. So, we had Chef Pedro from Bloom came in. We had chefs Venkatesh and Venkatesh from an Indian restaurant and a Hakka restaurant that I loved. I would go to, and they, it's taking that time to have that conversation and engage with them and say, we're looking to raise $15,000 and we can sell these tickets if we have food for people. I got a local microbrewery supported us and gave us all the free beer. So it was an open beer and food tasting night for people to come. It was a big success for me. We got the space donated. We had a silent auction. Silent auctions I find are hit or miss. It depends on how many people you can bring in, and also the content of the auction. They're also a ton of work to put together. So I don't necessarily recommend that if you don't have a big team that can help you fulfill that. People like short events. They like to be able to get in and out. So that food night that I was talking about, it was 2 hours from walking in the door to us starting to clean up. So it was people come, and we did it early so that people could go do other things if they needed to. I think you could come, doors were like 6:30 and the event was over by 8:30. The food started getting served sort of like 7 to 8. And then there was half an hour on either side. We did a little bit of speeches. The first year we had entertainment, and then we realized we didn't need it. We just played music and people wanted to talk, and they wanted to talk to the chefs and ask them about their food. They wanted to talk to their friends that they brought. We did we did have a silent auction at that event because we had a board member who was incredibly helpful and gave us so much time and got us amazing items that people actually wanted and would bid on. And we also had some artwork that had been donated. So what we did, one public appeal, said that we want to run this one event. It costs this much to do it. If everyone in the room gave us an extra $20, we could do it. A couple people put up their hands to give us larger numbers than that, which got the ball rolling. Though, you know, like live auctions are tricky to do because if there's nobody in the room that's going to commit to that. So I don't recommend like a live auction, but something like we have a goal on the night. You can see people that in this shirt or whatever to go make your donation. This is what the donation is specifically going to. For us at that fundraiser, it was paying a newcomer artist. We wanted to pay them to do a project for us, but it wasn't in our budget at the time. And so in order to do that project, we needed to raise the $2,000 that night, and we did. In addition to the cost of the revenue from the evening, which went into our operating budget. There's lots of, like, anything can be a fundraiser depending on what your interests are and your community interests are and what your skills are. But if you have to pay for space, if you have to pay for staff or time, that's always going to be a hard hill to climb, unless you have a massive team around you. So thinking about what you can leverage from your own life and your own connections in your own community to create those spaces for you. Is there, you know, like I mentioned, like restaurants that are on their dark days, like if they don't have, if it doesn't have to cost people something, it's something that they already have that they can give you. That's an easy first ask before asking them for money. You know, it's, could you give us your space on Saturday morning or whatever that is. Yeah. We only have a few minutes left in our time. So I'm just going to jump into a couple of things that I'm very passionate about, which is artist engagement and care. When you're thinking about producing with your community, remembering that your artists and the people that you are hiring, that you're working with, are also part of that community and how you can care for them. Building set check-ins for the team. We have this terrible word postmortem in our community, where we often think about everything and we discuss everything after a production, after a show, and often aren't thinking about things throughout the process of check-ins for our artists. And identifying, it can help you identify troubles before they happen, or identify concerns that you didn't even know were concerns for your artists. So creating those check-in points with the team, it can be as simple as like an email. Let's say, hey, it's your second week of rehearsal. Hope everyone's doing well. If you have any questions or if anything's not sitting right, or if things are feeling really great, feel free to reach out to me. As the producer, I often send that out to our company members here. And creating that, it also creates that culture of safety, support, and it also helps them invest in your company too. And thinking about the production as a success is important for them, not just for you. In self-produced productions, your artists are often your biggest advocates as well. They want the show to be a success. So finding ways for them to engage. They can also help you engage with promotion and the community narrative. One of the smaller shows I did in Toronto was about a train station and somebody selling cha in India at the train station. And we did guerrilla marketing at the train station in Toronto during rush hour, where we were handing out like little tea bags with info about the show, handing out postcards. We did a little 2-minute skit, snippet is what I meant to say, from the production for a production of something called The Four Corners, Queen and Bathurst. It was a production, an audio and interactive theater production about these four corners and all the different businesses and stores that have been iconically at those four corners. And so of their own accord, the artists that were involved in the production, because they were so invested in it and felt supported by the production, went out during rush hour for like the weeks leading up to the show at 5 to 7, handing out postcards at the four corners, telling everybody about the show that was happening, that was about this area. And they did that because they felt invested in the production and they wanted the outcomes to be a success. Thinking about building in regular check-ins and blind surveys at the end, but also midpoint check-ins, as I mentioned, making it really easy for people to communicate and letting them know how to communicate and with who to communicate is really important. Thinking about some of the newer trends in and alternative working styles, which I know aren't always financially feasible, but how can you adapt a work day to make it more humane for theater artists? So a lot of and again, this to Brad's point, bigger companies who are able to afford it are shifting to a five-day rehearsal schedule with longer rehearsal periods. There's funds out there for caregiver funding. So people who have elderly people that they care for or children, there's extra funds that are now available through grants and to support your artists. Looking at adaptive rehearsal schedules, who are the members that are in your company, and how can you create a schedule that reflects their lives and that makes it a more humane practice for them. And even small things when we're not able to do, not everyone can do a 5-day rehearsal week, that's a reality, and can afford to do that. So what are small things that we can do to make the process more humane and create the circumstances for people to give you their best work? So I ran through that very fast because I saw there was a question in the chat, and we only have a few minutes left. So I just wanted to have an opportunity for sort of an open discourse if anybody had questions. Comp tickets as a producer, how much do you give and to whom? Oh, interesting. Do you want to, Elizabeth, do you want to tell me a little bit more about, everyone has different definitions of comps. So I just want to talk a little bit about like.
Sometimes the actors will want comps, and I don't know, especially if it's a small project, I would prefer to give it back to the actors and not give a bunch of comp tickets. So
yeah, I've only ever given, like, I've never not given artist comps to a show. I do think I think limiting those comps is important, and you can also put limits on when those comps can be used. Again, thinking about if you want to offer comps, they can only be used maybe in the first 2 days, or and having that very clear at the beginning of the contract, and including in their contracts and the riders, your comp ticket policy and what it is for your company, and explanations as to why, like, especially if it's a profit share model, is that we limit our comps because we want to have the maximum amount of revenue for our artists to share for the payout at the end of the production. We do offer 2 comps per artist per production, but they must be used on these dates. And there's no exchanges or alternatives on that. I do think it promotes goodwill. And I think that especially if it's only 2 per artist, again, like the Globe's bigger, we offer 4, but if it's 2 per artist, they're able to bring other friends that they make them pay anyways, right? Generally speaking, they're going to have more than 2 people coming to the show, so that then they'll bring a larger group. But it is nice, and it's nice for them to be able to invite some of their friends who maybe are artists who don't have that expendable income, but are invested in the product that you're creating. Production. I hate calling theater product, but in terms of marketing and sales.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Heather for her expertise. And I think she's certainly given us a lot to think about and to work on in our next productions, whatever they may be. And I'd like to thank Sue and Barb for their interpretation. It's always wonderful to have the 2 of you along. I just want to remind you that On Cue has their riser season coming up starting in April. So there are about 4 different plays that will be presented. So please go to the website On Cue Regina and check out those plays. And I'm not sure whether the box office is open for those yet, but they will be soon. So check it out. Thanks everyone for coming tonight, and yeah, hope to see you again. Oh, and just make sure these productions are recorded, so they can be reviewed at any time. It takes us a little while to get them up there. And there will also be notes that will be put in there, and I will include everything that Heather is going to send me, and the links and all that kind of stuff in that as well. So thanks, and have a great night, everybody.
And if there's anything that you have as a follow-up question, feel free to send me an email, heather.e@globetheaterlive.com.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.